Hi there, this is Jenny from the Sewing Palace in Helena, Montana. Today I'm going to talk to you about making the outer borders for our quilt from Santa's Village. The past year we've been making different blocks every month, one a month, and they make up the outside around the Santa. So if you want to look at our YouTube channel, you can check it out and see how to make each block. Then we also discussed applique one month, which is the center, making the Santa. And now we're finally on to the border. So I'm going to show you some quick tips and hints for making this outer border and maybe some other options if you want to try those. So let's get started. One thing I would like to suggest is in the center of your quilt, you don't necessarily have to do applique. You could make 4 additional blocks and they could go in the center of the quilt. The center needs to measure 24.5 inches unfinished. So you can put whatever applique you want in the center, or you could also make 4 additional blocks, and here's an example of that, and that could go right in the center of the quilt. So that's another way of finishing it where you could skip the applique portion. The other thing that you could do is instead of doing the patchwork border of the trees and houses, you could embroider some houses. So I wanted to show you a couple of examples of some houses, and these are from various embroidery cards. One in particular is a Kimberbell collection that she enlarged the houses. And so this is made by one of our employees. Her name's Kathy, and she has embroidered quite a few houses to go around the border. So they're quite an assortment. And this is where she integrated the color blue, red, and green again. This one's kind of fun. It has a vinyl window on the front, so it has a little shimmer like you're actually looking through the glass. So you can see Kathy went a little crazy making some applique embroidery houses, but they're perfect, and they're going to be squared up to 6.5 inches square. So whatever you want on the outside, if you want to follow the pattern measurements, it would be 6.5 inches square. The other option is you could find a really cute Christmas motif that has a big print to it and just cut solid borders to put that around that if you're ready to be finished with the quilt. And then as for the trees, another option for the trees would be to applique those as well. What you can do is you can get some green fabrics and fuse on a fusible interfacing. So we've used light Steamacine 2, and you fuse it on, and then you use an AccuQuilt die, which this is called the Holiday Medley Collection, and you could cut out some trees. Then you would get your background fabric and peel off the paper and fuse it down. There's also an optional embroidery pattern that you can purchase, and that will applique the tree down, or you can just fuse it down and stitch around it. So those are a couple other ways that you could finish the border. Let's look at the house block a little closer. When you're assembling this block, this should measure 6.5 inches square before you sew it into your border. There are quite a bit of seams when you sew this together. There's a background fabric, a piece of the house, then several pieces to make up the window strip, another rectangle, and then also the door, another piece, and then another piece here. So when you sew all this together, there's quite a few seams. If you use best press or a starch alternative prior to cutting, that will help. But when you sew each of these seams, you really want to make sure you're sewing 1/4 inch seam. I would suggest a straight stitch plate and a really sharp needle and being very accurate with your stitching. Then this unit right here is made up of a flying geese unit. There's a way to make that the no waste method, which is in quite a few of our previous videos, or you can make it the traditional method. I'll show you that way. Here's your house unit broken down into units. This is what it will look like finished, and this is all the pieces that go together to sew it into one unit. So there's 2 pieces of background on each side. Then there are 2 houses. All the measurements are in the pattern, and there are lots of squares and rectangles. But out of the house fabric, you're going to want some squares, rectangles, and such to make up the house unit. Then you'll want a square for the window, and then a rectangle for the door. 2 pieces of background are the same size. All of these heights for a strip, so these are 3.5, 3.5, and once you sew these units together, they should measure 3.5 inches tall. Then you'll add your flying geese to the top. Again, you want to make sure each of these seams is very accurate and you're pressing them You can kind of check yourself against them to make sure once you sew this seam between the door and the house and you press it, that should measure this height. Same with this. When you sew these two seams, they should measure these heights. So that can really make sure to know if you have an accurate 1/4 inch or what you can do to improve that to make sure you're accurate. Once you get these small ones sewn in together into strips, then you'll just build your unit across so that you have your house. If you'd like to create a mirror image of that, you certainly may. You can move your window and door unit over. There's nothing wrong with moving these units around if you want different layouts for the house, or you can do the same thing over and over. Again, these two are different sizes. One is wider than the other. You could do something like that. Really, really up to you, as long as this measures 3.5 inches tall by 6.5 inches wide, unfinished. So go ahead and assemble your house units. I'll double check on the number. I think you need 16 of those, but you'll need quite a few to get around the border. And then the other units are tree units, so I'll show you those next. The no waste flying geese method, you do need 16 houses. So when you make those 16 houses, you could make the flying geese roofs for the houses 4 at a time, so that would speed things up. So we're going to review that. The unit for the top of the house is a 3-inch by 6-inch finished flying geese unit. So the way that you make that is your roof is going to be a large square, and I got these measurements from BlockLock, their website. I can put a link to that in the video description, but we want a 3-inch by 6-inch finish, so I have it highlighted on my chart. But what you're going to cut is a large square that measures 7.5. That's going to be your roof color. And then your background, you're going to cut 4 pieces that are 4 1/8. The first step, you lay those right sides together and you mark a line diagonally from point to point. These should overlap in the center. And what you do with that line is you sew on each side of that line 1/4 inch, and then you'll yield. This is going to be a different size, but I have this step done already, so I wanted to show it to you. Once you've sewn on each side of that diagonal line, you will yield 2 pieces that look like this. So again, this is a different size. This isn't exact, but I have this on one already sewn. Once you've done that step, you then press this so it looks like a heart, like so. And then once that's pressed, you'll still have 2 more of these solid squares left. One will go on this half and the other on the other half. Then you line this up, mark diagonally, sew on each side, and you'll yield 1 and 2, and then 2 from the other side. You'll have flying geese. You will use your BlockLock ruler to square them up, or your traditional ruler. The BlockLock ruler will make it perfect. This should measure 3.5 by 6.5. So that's the no waste method. Now I'll show you the traditional method, which is in the pattern. The traditional method in the pattern has you cut a roof fabric that is a rectangle, and that roof fabric is 3.5 by 6.5. Then you take a background fabric that measures 3.5, and you line it up right sides together, and you sew diagonally from point to point. You then trim this off, and this is waste, and then you will press this away from your background fabric. Then you will have another background square that measures 3.5 inches. You'll lay that right side down, mark a line diagonally, sew directly on that line, and then again trim away the excess on this piece and press it out, and you will have a 3.5 by 6.5 unfinished roof for your house. Let's look at the tree block a little closer. So on the tree unit, this again needs to measure 6.5 inches unfinished, and that will be from these edges here. These are little sashing strips that get added in between the house and the tree block. And this top row out of the tree block is made up of a flying geese unit with 2 background rectangles on the side. Then these 2 pieces of the tree are a flip and sew method where you add triangles to the edges of it. and flip them out, and then you might add a little background on this middle row. You actually add a tiny little strip there, and then this last one, the tip goes all the way to the edge of the block. Then you add the trunk. So again, quite a few seams on your tree block, but it'll get you good practice. The method for sewing the tree units is a flip and sew method. These strips are 2 1/4 inches in height, and then the last strip at the bottom is 2 1/2 inches. So this one's 2 1/2, these are each 2 1/4, following the pattern directions. Then you take squares that are 2 1/4 inches and you lay them right sides down. You sew diagonally from point to point and then flip it out, and that's your unit. Again, you would trim off this excess. So that's how you would create these tree units. The one thing I did find in the pattern, if this is 2 1/2 inches in height, this square should be 2 1/2 inches, and I didn't see that in the directions. It said 2 1/4. So I adjusted this square to 2 1/2 and sewed diagonally on each side of that one, and this one on top. Now, in order to get the width of the strips to be 6 1/2, you do have to add background fabric, and as the strips get wider, these get smaller, and the bottom strip has no background fabric on it. So that's how you're going to assemble the tree unit in 3 consecutive flip and sew methods with some green fabrics. The thing you need is a trunk on the tree. So this is a strip piecing method. You'll take a strip of brown fabric, and the brown fabric is the tree trunk, and it is 1 1/2 inches wide by the width of the fabric. And then you'll want 2 strips of background fabric, and those are 3 1/2 inches wide. I'm sorry, 3 inches wide. I said 3 1/2. They're 3 inches wide. So this is 1 1/2, this is 3, and this is 3. Then you'll sew those strips together so that you have a unit that looks like so. After you've got them sewn, you'll press them so that they lay flat, pressing towards the dark fabric. Then you'll subcut this into small little trunks, and those are cut into 1 1/4 inch segments. This should measure 6 1/2 inches after you sew these 3 strips together. 16 house units, those get sewn together so that you have a top and a bottom, and you'll have a spacer in between. Those spacers are 1 1/4 by 6 1/2, and if you follow the pattern, all the houses will sit on the base of the quilt, and they'll kind of form a circle around it. So good luck finishing all your house and tree blocks. I want to thank you for joining us over the past year making this cute holiday quilt. The pattern is Santa's Village by Thimble Creek Quilts, and you can check out our videos for all of the blocks. You'll learn how to make the blocks using different methods, using AccuQuilt. Then when you go to make the border, it is labor intensive, but it will really improve your piecing skills. If you want to just try 2 houses, you could put those in 2 different corners, and maybe try 2 trees and put those in opposite corners. Then you could pick a cute holiday print and fill in with a holiday print for your border. So that's another option. You could also do some of the other things that we talked about, which is cutting it with the AccuQuilt, the holiday medley die. So this tree works perfectly for that. Or using your embroidery machine to applique some houses. This is from Kimberbell, and they have a cute little collection of homes. So lots of ways to finish your outer quilt or your quilt and make it ready for Christmas. I thank you again and wish you a wonderful holiday season, and check out our YouTube channel for other techniques. Thanks for joining us. This is Jenny from the Sewing Palace. See you later.